Have you ever like been so sure about something you saw, and then later you're like, wait a minute, that's not how it happened? Or,
Yeah.
maybe somebody says something that makes you kind of question what you thought you saw.
Absolutely.
It's unsettling, right? It can really shake your confidence in what you thought you knew.
It really is. And it's interesting because our memories are not these perfect recordings like a video camera.
Right.
They're really malleable. They're susceptible to suggestion
Wow.
and prone to errors.
So they're really not reliable.
Not as much as we'd like to think.
That's kind of scary.
It is. And that imperfection is really at the heart of what we're diving into today.
Okay, so let's get into it. What's the case?
So today we're looking at the case of John Adrian Velasquez.
Okay.
He goes by JJ.
Okay.
And he was convicted of murder back in 1998, based entirely on eyewitness accounts.
Entirely.
Entirely.
Oh.
But as we'll see, the foundation of his conviction is shaky at best.
Head boy.
Yeah, and eyewitness testimony, it can be really powerful, right?
For sure.
It's often very convincing in court, but it's also notoriously unreliable.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it like a crime scene. It's chaotic.
Exactly.
People are stressed out.
Yeah.
There's pressure to find the bad guy.
Absolutely.
All those things can really mess with your memory.
Absolutely. All those factors can influence how we remember things and how we report them later on.
So give me the details of this case.
All right, so this case revolves around the death of a man named Al Ward.
Okay.
He was a retired police officer.
Oh, wow.
And he was killed in this illegal number spot in Harlem.
So like a gambling den.
Exactly. Picture a dimly lit room, people kind of scrambling around a sudden burst of violence.
It sounds like a movie.
It doesn't it? Not exactly the best setting for clear and accurate memories.
No, not at all.
And unfortunately, those hazy memories became the very basis of the case against JJ.
Okay, but it sounds like a pretty straightforward murder case. What makes this one so complicated?
Well, initially, the police were actually focused on a completely different suspect.
Oh, really?
A guy named Mustafa.
Okay. And there were actually some tips and police memos pointing to him.
Right. But then a man named Augustus Brown comes forward, and the entire investigation takes a sharp turn.
And who was Augustus Brown?
So Brown was someone who struggled with heroin addiction.
Okay.
And he identified JJ from a mugshot.
Oh, wow.
His testimony became the absolute cornerstone of the prosecution's case.
Got it.
But years later, he did something unexpected. He recanted his testimony.
He took it back.
Yeah, he completely took it back.
That's huge.
This recantation is crucial because Brown claimed that the police pressured him.
Oh, wow.
During the identification process.
During the whole mugshot thing.
Exactly. He said he felt uncertain.
Oh, geez.
And what's even more shocking is that he was allowed to keep his heroin after he picked JJ's photo.
Oh, my gosh.
It's wild, right? It raises serious questions about how that identification went down and the possibility of coercion.
So you're saying one single eyewitness account that was later questioned put this guy's life on hold.
It did, and the doubts about the case don't stop there.
Oh, there's more.
Oh, yeah. The investigation itself was shockingly inadequate.
Really?
In what way?
Well, especially when it comes to JJ's court-appointed investigator, a guy named David Barrett.
Okay.
This is where we see a systemic issue,
Yeah.
Court-appointed investigators often have way too many cases and not enough resources.
So they're overworked and underpaid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in JJ's case, Barrett admitted to having very limited interaction with JJ's lawyers.
Really?
And he barely scratched the surface of the investigation.
So he didn't do his job?
Not really. He didn't even get basic information like the names of the other eyewitnesses.
Oh, wow.
Or even that there was this initial suspect, Mustafa.
It's like the system failed JJ before he even stepped into the courtroom. It really does seem that way. This lack of thoroughness underscores something really important.
What's that?
That justice relies on a strong and well-supported investigative process.
Right.
When that process is compromised,
Right.
it makes it so much harder to find the truth.
So we have a shaky eyewitness account and basically no investigation.
So far, yeah.
What about the other eyewitnesses?
Let's talk about them.
Yeah.
First up, we have Lorenzo Woodford.
Okay.
He actually knew Al Ward and was there during the shooting.
Oh, why?
Initially, he wasn't sure during the lineup, but later he insisted that he was certain about JJ.
Okay, so he changed his mind.
He did, but there's a problem.
What the?
His initial description to the police.
Yeah.
He said the shooter had cornrows.
Okay.
But if you look at pictures of JJ from back then, he didn't have cornrows.
Oh, so his story doesn't add up.
Right. And then we have the Jones brothers, Robert and Philip.
Okay.
Robert initially identified JJ, but then later said that JJ's half-brother actually looked more like the shooter.
Wait, so which one was it?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And to make things even more complicated, Philip actually signed an affidavit.
A sworn statement.
Yeah, where he recanted his entire trial testimony.
He said he was wrong.
He did. He claimed that he felt pressured by police threats
Oh, wow.
and the promise of getting parole if he gave what they considered truthful testimony.
So he was basically coerced.
Potentially, yeah.
This is unbelievable. It's like every piece of evidence is unreliable.
It's definitely a case filled with doubt, and we haven't even gotten to the juror who was misidentified as the shooter.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
There's a juror who was mistaken for the shooter.
Yeah.
You're kidding me.
Oh, I'm not. This happened during the trial itself.
What?
Yeah, one of the eyewitnesses, Dorothy Kennedy, she pointed him out.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
This juror's perspective adds a whole other layer to this story.
I can't even imagine.
Imagine being on a jury, right? You're there to decide someone's fate.
Yeah?
And then you're suddenly misidentified as the perpetrator.
That would be terrifying.
Absolutely. It says a lot about how fragile memory can be.
Wow. So much to unpack here.
There is.
Before we get into the juror's story,
Mm-hmm.
let's just take a second to kind of recap what we've learned so far.
Okay. We were just talking about all those layers of doubt in JJ's conviction.
Yeah.
And maybe the most striking is what happened to juror #6.
Right. The one who was misidentified.
Yeah, Dorothy Kennedy, one of the eyewitnesses, she actually pointed him out as the gunman.
I still can't believe that happened.
It's pretty wild, right? To be sitting on a jury,
Yeah.
deciding someone else's fate,
Right.
and then to be mistaken for the criminal yourself.
I can't imagine how disorienting that would be.
Totally. It really highlights what we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Memory is not always accurate.
No, it's not.
And this juror, he had to struggle with that during the deliberations.
Yeah, knowing he'd been misidentified.
Exactly. That must have been so tough.
Did he ever talk about it?
He did. He later said that he felt guilty about the verdict,
Oh, wow.
even years later.
That's heavy.
Yeah, it shows how much responsibility jurors have
Yeah.
and how these cases can stick with them.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the investigation itself.
Right.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah, especially JJ's court-appointed investigator, David Barrett.
Oh, yeah. The guy who basically did nothing.
Pretty much. He admitted that he barely did any work on the case.
It's unbelievable that he didn't even have the names of the other eyewitnesses.
It's crazy, right? Or that he didn't know about Mustafa being the initial suspect.
Yeah, that's a major red flag.
For sure. This brings up the issue of funding for court-appointed investigators.
Mm-hmm.
They need more resources and support.
Yeah, so they can do their jobs properly.
Exactly. Especially when someone's freedom is on the line.
It seems like JJ's lawyers should have given Barrett more information, though.
You'd think so, right? It looks like there were some communication breakdowns.
Well, that's not good.
No, it's not. Those kinds of mistakes can have huge consequences.
Like what happened to JJ?
Exactly. In this case, it meant that potentially crucial evidence about Mustafa was never investigated. Wow.
And the whole issue of eyewitness reliability wasn't really looked into.
So it's like a perfect storm of problems.
Yeah, unreliable witnesses, a messed up investigation, a juror struggling with guilt.
It makes you wonder how the justice system could get things so wrong.
Well, the pursuit of justice isn't always perfect.
True.
It's a human system, so there are bound to be flaws.
Right? Human memory isn't perfect.
Exactly. And biases can sneak into investigations.
And sometimes the system itself has limitations.
All of those things can make it harder to find the truth.
Okay, so we've seen all these problems in JJ's case.
Right.
But what does it all mean?
What can we learn from it?
Yeah, what does this mean for our listener?
I think this deep dive raises some big questions about how much we can trust eyewitness testimony.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how much weight should it be given in court?
Right.
What can be done to prevent wrongful convictions?
Because of these memory problems.
Exactly. And what happens when someone's conviction falls apart years later?
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
Yeah.
And it can be unsettling. Yeah, for sure. It makes you wonder how many other cases are out there
Yeah.
where the evidence is just as questionable.
Right. But even with all of this going against him,
Yeah.
it's important to remember that JJ never gave up hope.
That's inspiring.
It is. He went through his case files himself, reached out for help, and eventually found lawyers who would take his case pro bono.
So he found people who believed in him.
He did, and that makes a big difference.
It does. His story shows how important it is to fight for yourself.
Even when it seems impossible.
Exactly. And thankfully, he has a team now that's dedicated to finding out the truth.
Yeah, and fighting for his freedom.
It just goes to show that things can change
They can.
and that there's always hope.
Absolutely. And this case also shows how important organizations like the Innocence Project are.
Oh, yeah. They do amazing work.
They really do. They're
Yeah.
fighting to get innocent people out of prison.
Right.
And they're shining a light on these problems in the justice system.
So they're not just helping individuals,
No, they're working for systemic change.
which is really what we need.
For sure.
So we've talked about the murder, the eyewitnesses, the bad investigation, and even the juror who's still dealing with the guilt.
Right.
What's the main takeaway here as we move into the last part of our deep dive?
What should our listeners keep in mind?
Yeah.
Well, I think the big theme here is doubt.
Doubt.
Yeah, from the beginning with Mustafa to the eyewitness accounts changing and the jurors' experience, certainty is really hard to find in this case.
It is. It's like everyone's second guessing themselves.
And that's important to remember.
Yeah, we shouldn't just accept things at face value.
Right. Especially in cases like this.
We need to be skeptical.
Absolutely. Question what we hear and demand better investigations.
So we don't end up with more JJ.
Exactly. We need to hold the justice system accountable.
Okay, so let's move on from the past
Yeah.
and talk about what's happening now.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll find out what's been going on since the trial and what's next for JJ and his fight for justice. Stay tuned. Okay, so we're back and ready to hear what's happened since the trial.
All right. So remember we talked about that new district attorney, Cyrus Vance Jr.?
Yeah, the one who was going to set up that conviction integrity unit?
Right. Well, that unit actually became a reality,
Oh, wow.
and it played a big part in JJ's case.
So they actually re-examined his conviction.
They did. It's a big deal,
Oh.
because it shows that the justice system can admit when it makes mistakes.
Which it definitely does sometimes.
It does. And having a special unit to look into those mistakes is really important.
So how did this unit get involved in JJ's case?
Well, his lawyers, Bob Godley and Celia Gordon,
Okay.
they worked really hard to present all the new evidence.
Like those recantations.
Exactly. They had Brown and Philip Jones taking back their statements,
Right.
Robert Jones expressing doubts,
Yeah.
and of course the jurors' experience.
Right.
It all started to paint a different picture.
Like maybe JJ wasn't guilty after all.
Right. The DA's office could have just ignored all of that, but they didn't. They took it seriously.
Wow.
They did a whole new investigation,
Really?
looked at the evidence again with fresh eyes.
That's impressive.
It is. And in the end, they made a huge decision.
What did they do?
They vacated JJ's conviction.
They threw out the whole thing.
They did. It was a huge victory for JJ.
Wow. That's amazing.
It really is. It shows what can happen when you don't give up.
Yeah, and when you have good lawyers fighting for you.
Absolutely. And it shows that the system can correct its mistakes.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
It gives me hope,
Me too. It's a reminder that we all have a part to play in making sure justice is served.
Exactly. We can speak out against injustice,
Right.
support groups like the Innocence Project,
Yeah.
and just stay informed.
So we know what's going on.
Right. We can all do something.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into JJ's story, what's the one thing we want our listeners to take away?
I think it all comes back to how important memory is.
And how unreliable it can be.
Exactly. Our memories are powerful, but they're not perfect. And they can have a huge impact on people's lives.
Like in JJ's case.
Right. So as you go about your day, think about your own memories.
Okay.
How much can you really trust them?
That's deep.
And when your memories involve other people, think about the responsibility you have to be accurate.
That's a powerful thought to leave us with.
It is.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into memory, doubt, and the fight for justice.